I have told this story exactly twice in 11 years, and both times I started in the wrong place. I started with the village, with the smoke, with the part where the rounds were coming through the mud walls like they were paper. That is the part people want. But that is not where it starts. It starts 3 days earlier on a flat gray morning at Camp Verrill, with me standing in the chow line saying something I have been ashamed of ever since. My name is Cole Brenner. At the time I was a Master Sergeant ground team leader for a small element that did overwatch and route work in the Sarkin Valley, which is a long, ugly cut of country between two mountain spines where the wind comes down off the high snow in the afternoon and rakes the whole basin flat. I had been in long enough to be tired and not long enough to be wise, which is the most dangerous kind of soldier there is. I had buried friends. I had a way of deciding things about people before I knew anything about them, and I told myself that was instinct. It was not instinct, it was laziness wearing instinct's coat. We were getting close air support reassigned to us that week because our usual jets had been pulled south for a bigger operation. There's a feeling you get when your air changes. You spend months learning the pilot's voices on the radio, learning who pushes and close and who stays high and safe, learning whose gun runs you would bet your life on because you have already bet your life on them and won. Losing that is like losing a handrail in the dark. You reach for it and it is not there. So I was already sour when the new flight came in. I watched the jets taxi from the line outside the chow tent, two A-10s, those big ugly straight-wing things people call warthogs, the ones built around a gun the size of a man. They are not pretty, they are not fast. They are the only aircraft I have ever loved because they fly low and slow and mean right down in the dirt with us, close enough that you can read the kill marks on the nose. The men who fly them tend to be a certain kind of person. Patient, a little strange, the kind who would rather take a hit than miss. The pilot who climbed down from the lead jet was a woman. I want to be honest about what went through my head because the whole point of this is the honesty. I did not think anything noble, I did not think anything thoughtful. I looked at her crossing the line in a flight suit with her helmet under her arm, short and lean, maybe a head shorter than me, and I thought, they sent us a checkbox. I thought it the way you think the weather is bad, casually, like a fact. Her name was Captain Dana Voss. Her call sign, I would learn, was Sledge. She walked past us toward the operations tent without looking at anybody, and a few of the fighter guys at the next table, pointy-nosed pilots passing through, the kind who think a warthog is a tractor with a gun started in. Not loud, just loud enough. That's the CAS for the Valley Run, that's who's covering Brenner's boys. Relax, she'll bingo and bolt the first time it gets hot, drop her tanks and run for the fence. One of them laughed, a big easy laugh, and the others gave him the laugh back. That one was a major named Hale. I did not know it then, but I would learn his name very well. He had a fighter pilot's face, handsome and cert, the kind of certain that has never once been wrong in a way that cost him anything. I'm serious, he said. Mark it. First RPG that comes up at her, she's gone. They give them the slow jets so they can't get in too much trouble. Here is the part I am ashamed of. I could have said nothing. I could have eaten my eggs and minded my own war. Instead I leaned back toward the radio shack where my JTAC was sitting, my Joint Terminal Attack Controller, a quiet kid named Prout who talked to the planes for us, and I said, Prout, find out who else is on the rotation, see if we can pull a different bird for the corps I'm tasking. Prout looked at me. He was 23 and he had not yet learned to think like me, which is to his eternal credit. Sir, she's the lead. She's got the most hours on the airframe of anyone in that flight. I don't care about hours, I said. I care who's going to be there when the wall comes down, find out. He found out. The answer was that there was nobody else, that the flight was hers, that Captain Voss had been flying this kind of mission longer than half the men in that tent had been in uniform. I heard all of that and I let it go in one ear and out the other because I had already decided, the way I always decided, and a decided man does not hear well. I met her formally that evening at the mission brief, in the plywood operations building with the maps pinned to the wall and the bad coffee going cold in everybody's hands. She came in on time, which I noticed, and she sat up at the back, which I noticed, and she did not say much at first, which I took for what I wanted it to be. She had a notebook, an actual paper notebook, and she wrote in it the whole time the intel sergeant was talking, and when he was done she asked 4 questions. I remember the questions because of what happened later. She asked about the afternoon winds in the basin, the ones that come down off the snow. She asked about the elevation of Hollow Ridge relative to the village floor and whether the maps were current, because the maps in that country were never current. She asked about where exactly we expected to be if it went bad, not where we planned to be, but where we would actually end up, which is a question only people who have been in a real fight know to ask. And she asked Prout, my JTAC, what his danger close threshold was, how close he was comfortable calling the gun. Prout, God bless him, said, whatever you can shoot, ma'am, I can talk. She looked at him for a second, then she said, good, because if your boys get pinned in those alleys, there is exactly one way I'm going to be able to help you, and it is going to feel a lot closer than you'll like. She said it flat. No drama, the way you'd tell somebody the bridge is out ahead. Major Hale was at that brief too, leaning in the doorway because his flight was staging out of Verrill for a couple of days. When Voss said that, he made a small sound, half a laugh, and shook his head, and a couple of the younger guys grinned. She did not turn around. She wrote something in her notebook. I thought she hadn't heard him. I was wrong about that, the same way I was wrong about everything else that week. She heard everything. She had just learned a long time ago that the answer to a man like Hale is not words. After the brief, I did something I am also not proud of. I went to my company commander and I told him quietly, soldier to soldier, that I wasn't sure about the air, that I'd feel better with a more experienced hand. He asked me what I knew about her. I said I didn't know anything about her. He said, "Then how do you know she's not experienced?" And I didn't have an answer, so I made my face hard and said I just had a feeling, and he let it drop because he was tired too. We were all tired. That is the thing nobody tells you about how these mistakes get made. They do not get made by villains, they get made by tired men who have stopped looking. The night before the Coram run, I couldn't sleep, so I walked the line. The two warthogs were parked under the lights with the crew chiefs working on them, and I stopped because there was somebody up on a ladder against the lead jet, somebody small, running a gloved hand along the leading edge of the wing the way you'd check a horse's leg. It was her. It was past midnight, and she was out there alone with a flashlight clamped in her teeth, going over the airplane inch by inch, talking low to the crew chief, an older master sergeant named Quill who I knew a little and respected a lot. She wasn't doing a show pre-flight for anybody's benefit. There was nobody out there to see. She was doing it because that is who she was when no one was watching, which is the only thing about a person that ever actually counts. I stood in the dark and watched her for a while, and then I went back to my rack and lay there feeling something I couldn't name, and the something was the first crack in the thing I had decided about her. I told myself it was nothing. I told myself a lot of things that week. We rolled out for Coram before dawn. The plan was simple, which should have told us something because the simple plans are the ones that go wrong in complicated ways. We were to move into the village, link with a friendly element, and set overwatch on the road below Hollow Ridge while the engineers did their work on a culvert the enemy liked to mine. In and out, half a day. The kind of mission you have done 100 times, and so you stop respecting it, which is exactly when it kills you. Coram sat in a fold of ground beneath the ridge, a couple hundred mud-walled compounds packed tight along 3 or 4 crooked lanes, with the river behind it and the high ground of Hollow Ridge standing over the whole thing like a held breath. I did not like it the second I saw it in the gray light. Too many windows, too much high ground, too quiet, and the quiet of a place is a language if you have learned to read it. And Coram that morning was saying something I did not want to hear. We were in the 3rd lane near the center. My element split into 2 stacks with the engineers behind us when it came apart. It came apart the way it always does, all at once and from everywhere. A machine gun opened up from the ridge first, the big slow thump of it walking down the lane, and then the smaller guns from the compounds on both sides, and then the first RPG, which came out of a window so close I felt the heat of it go past my face before I heard it. It hit the wall behind us and the wall came apart, and a piece of it took down one of my engineers, a kid named Ortega, who went down hard and did not get up on his own. I have been in a lot of fights. This one I knew inside of 10 seconds was different because they had us. They had the high ground and they had both sides and they had the back, and they had clearly been waiting, and the volume of fire told me there were not a dozen of them up there but scores, maybe 100, dug into the ridge and the compounds in a way that meant somebody patient had set this up over days. We were not in a firefight. We were in a trap that was closing. We did what you do. We got off the open lane, we got into a compound on the south side with thick walls, we dragged Ortega and the others who were hit, and we set what guns we had into the windows and the doorway, and we started trying to figure out how to live. Pruitt was right next to me on the floor with his radio, and I grabbed him by the strap and put my mouth to his ear because the noise was a physical thing by then, and I said the words I had spent 3 days making sure I would have to say. Get me air right now." Pruitt got on the net. I will never forget his voice because it didn't shake. He was 23 and the wall was coming apart over his head, and he talked to that radio like he was ordering breakfast, calling for the close air support our flight, calling for sledge. And here is the thing about that morning that I have turned over and over for 11 years. The weather had come in. Overnight a ceiling had dropped into the valley, a low gray lid of cloud and blowing dust that sat right down on top of Hollow Ridge, so that the jets above us were flying in a world with no bottom and no sides, and below them was a maze of compounds with friendlies and enemy tangled together at distances measured in meters. Every rule and every manual says you do not put a gun run into that. You cannot see, you cannot be sure. The single worst thing a pilot can do is fire on the people she is trying to save, and that morning the conditions were practically designed to make her do exactly that. The first voice that answered Pruitt was not Sledge. It was another aircraft, fast movers, the pointy-nosed jet stacked up high, and the voice was calm and regretful and final. They could not get below the weather. They could not positively identify. They were not going to drop into that mess and risk killing us by accident. It was the right call by the book, and I do not blame them, and I have never blamed them. They held high and they watched us die on their radios because that is what the book said to do. I remember the feeling in that compound when we understood the fast air wasn't coming down. It is a feeling I hope you never have. It is the feeling of the floor of the world giving way. I had 2 more men hit by then. Ortega was bleeding out under a poncho and my medic had his hands inside him. The enemy was close enough that we could hear them calling to each other over the guns, working closer, getting ready to rush the compound. And once they were inside the walls with us, it was over and everyone in that building knew it. And then Sledge came on the net. Her voice was the same flat, level voice from the brief. No drama, she said she was inbound. She said she was going to come down through the weather and put eyes on us, and she needed Prout to talk to her and not stop talking no matter what, and she needed us to mark our position with smoke and to get our heads down and trust her, because what was about to happen was going to feel like the end of the world right on top of us. And it was not the end of the world, it was her, and she was not going to hit us. Prout looked at me, I looked at him. I had spent 3 days trying to get a different airplane than this one. And now this one was the only thing in the sky willing to come down into the dark for us, and I nodded at Prout, and Prout keyed the net and said, "Sledge, we trust you, we're marking now." I want to try to make you understand what she did, because the men who were there have spent the rest of their lives trying to make people understand it and mostly failing, because there are no words big enough. She brought a warthog down through a ceiling she could not see through, into a valley with a ridge in it that would kill her if she misjudged it by 100 feet in dust and cloud to get below the weather and find us. She did it the only way it can be done, which is by knowing the terrain so completely, so absolutely that she could fly it blind, and now I understood the questions at the brief, the winds, the elevation of the ridge, the maps. She had not been making conversation. She had been memorizing the box she might one day have to fly inside of with her eyes closed. She had been preparing 3 days ago for this exact morning while I was in the chow line deciding she would run. She came out of the bottom of the cloud right over the river behind the village, low, so low that men who saw it later swore she was below the level of the compound roofs, and she rolled along the lane on her first pass without firing, just looking, eating the ground fire that came up at her, and a lot of it came up at her. The ridge guns and the small guns all turning to hammer at this slow, ugly airplane that had appeared out of the murk. And she found the smoke and she found us and she came back on the net and said, calm as still water, "I have your smoke. I have the bad guys. I'm going to start working the ridge first. Prout, you keep talking to me. Brenner's people, get down and stay down." Then she pulled up into the cloud and came back around, and she fired the gun for the first time. If you have never heard the gun on a warthog from underneath, close, I cannot fully give it to you. It is not a rattle and it is not a boom. It is a single tearing sound, a long ripping bellow, the angriest sound a machine has ever made, the sound of more metal coming out of the sky in 2 seconds than you can imagine, and when it walks across the ground 100 meters from you, the earth jumps and the air slaps you and dust and grit come up in a wall. The first time she fired, she put it across the top of Hollow Ridge, right on the machine gun that had us pinned, and the gun stopped. Just stopped. And the men in that compound, men who had given up, who were writing the letters in their heads, lifted their faces out of the dirt. She did it again and again. She would disappear up into the gray, swing around in a pattern only she could see, drop back down out of the cloud at the precise spot and the precise instant, hammer a target Prout had talked her onto, and climb away before the ground fire could find her. Except the ground fire was finding her. We could see it now. The streams of green and white tracer reaching up into the cloud after her every time she went back in. And we could hear between her passes, the heavier thump of bigger guns, anti-aircraft guns the enemy had hauled up onto the ridge, throwing up shells the size of fists at a slow airplane, making the same kind of run over and over because that was the only way to keep us alive. She had to keep coming back to the same place. That is the part the fast jets understood and would not do. To shoot close enough to save us, she had to fly slow and low and predictable, right down the throat of everything they had again and again, and every single pass she knew they were waiting for her, and every single pass she came anyway. The 3rd or 4th time she took a hit, we saw it. Something heavy reached up out of the ridge and caught her, and a piece came off the airplane off the left side, and a thin trail started behind her, and her voice came on the net for a second, the only time all morning it changed, tight now working, and she said, "I'm hit left side, I'm okay, stay with me, Prout." And then before he could even answer, she was back in, gun tearing, putting it down on a group of enemy that had pushed into the lane to rush us. And the rush came apart in the dust and did not reach our wall. I stopped being a man who had decided anything about her somewhere in there. I just became a man on a floor watching the bravest thing he would ever see. She held us up for what the records later said was 31 minutes and what felt like a year. 31 minutes of coming down into a valley that was trying to kill her again and again to keep 100 enemy off 20 Americans. She lost an engine. We did not know it at the time, but one of the hits had taken out her left engine, and a Warthog can fly on one. That is the whole genius of the thing. It is built to be hurt and keep flying, but flying on one engine shot up, low on fuel in that weather in that valley making gun runs. There is no manual for that. There is no school for that. There is just whatever a person has inside them, and what she had inside her I have never seen the equal of before or since. The bigger guns had run out of bullets. Around them the village smoked. And then between one pass and the next my radio, Prout's radio, went quiet and we waited, and I felt my stomach drop because I thought they had finally caught her. I thought the trail of smoke had finally become a falling thing, and I grabbed Prout and I said, "Where is she? Where's the airplane?" And Prout was keying the net saying, "Sledge, sledge, say status." And there was nothing, and the worst 3 seconds of my life went by. Then her voice came back, slow, a little far away. "Still here," she said. "I'm Winchester, out of bullets." The gun was empty. She had fired the whole airplane dry. And then she said the thing that I have repeated at 2 funerals and will repeat at my own. She said, "I'm staying on station. I'll make dry passes. They don't know I'm empty. I'm going to keep them off you until you're out. Prout, get your wounded moving. I'll be the loud part of the sky." That is what she did. She had no bullets left. An empty airplane is just a target. And she flew that empty shot-up single-engine airplane back down into the valley and made pass after pass with a dead gun low and screaming, because the enemy on that ridge did not know she was empty, and every time that ugly silhouette came howling down out of the cloud they kept their heads down and stopped shooting at us long enough for us to move. She made herself a decoy. She put her body and her broken airplane between us and the guns with nothing left to fight back with, and she did it on purpose, calmly, calling it out so we'd understand, so we could run. We ran. We got Ortega and the others up on litters and we broke out of that compound under the noise of her passes, and we ran the wounded down to the river line where the ground rose enough to give us cover, and a quick reaction force met us there and we lived. 20 of us walked or were carried out of Coram who should by every reasonable measure have died on that floor. Ortega lived. He has 3 kids now. The youngest one is named Dana and he has never told her why. I counted later with Prout going over the recordings. 11 times she came down into that valley and fired or fainted on a target danger close to us. 11 passes through everything they had on a dying airplane. 11. She did not crash. That is the thing people always assume, that a story like this has to end with the heroic death, but it does not, and I am glad because she had given enough without giving that too. She nursed that airplane up out of the valley on one engine with the controls half shot away, and she flew it 40 minutes back to Verrill in the weather, and she put it down on the runway in a way that Quill, the old crew chief, said afterward should not have been possible, and he had been on that flight line for 20 years. I was not there to see her land. I was still down in the valley. But I heard about it, and weeks later I stood with Quill and watched the recording of the airplane coming back to Verrill, and I want to tell you about the flight line because that is where the story actually ends. Word had gone ahead. Word always goes ahead. By the time her jet came over the wire there were men standing out on the line who had no reason to be there. The fast movers had landed already. Major Hale was there, the one who had laughed in the chow tent, who had said she'd run the first time it got hot. The whole transient flight was there. And the ready room had emptied out, pilots and crew, everybody who had heard what came over the net from Coram that morning, and they stood along the line in the blowing dust and watched her airplane come in. I have seen that airplane in photographs since. It should not have been flying. The left engine was a torn black hole. The wing was chewed open in 3 places. There were holes in the fuselage you could put your arm through, and the canopy was starred where something had hit it a foot from her head, and a great long scorch ran back from the wing root where she had been burning and had somehow not burned. It came down the runway slow and crooked and trailing smoke, and it stopped, and for a moment nobody moved, and then the canopy came up and she climbed down the ladder. She climbed down steady. That is what every man who was there tells you first, not staggering, not weeping, not playing it up. She got down off the ladder and she stood next to that ruined airplane and she pulled her helmet off, and her face was gray with exhaustion and there was blood on her cheek from where the starred canopy had cut her, and she looked at the men standing there and she did not say anything. She did not have to. And the flight line rose. I do not know a better way to put it. Men who had been leaning, men who had been standing easy, men who had laughed at her 3 days before came up straight all along that line, and there was no order given, nobody called it, but they came to attention in the dust in front of that broken airplane and they held it and nobody spoke. The ready room that had mocked her stood in silence for her, every man of them in the only language a fighting outfit has for the thing she had just done. Major Hale was in that line. Quill told me this part because Quill was standing near him. Hale came to attention with the rest of them and he raised his hand to salute her and his hand was shaking and he could not hold it still, and he could not look her in the eye, and after a second he had to bring the hand down because it would not stay up, and he stood there with his jaw working and nothing coming out. The man who had said she'd run the first time it got hot could not hold a salute steady in front of the woman who had not run, who had flown an empty airplane back into the guns to cover other men's children, who had brought a dying jet home rather than leave the valley while one American was still in it. I asked Quill later about her record. I asked him what I should have asked 3 days before I ever needed her, what I should have asked before I leaned over to Prout in the chow tent and tried to get a different airplane. Quill was quiet for a while the way he got, then he told me. He told me how many times she had done it before in other valleys, for other men who never knew her name, the saves, the men she had pulled out of the fire from 1,000 feet up, the danger-close work nobody else in the wing would touch, the time she had brought home an airplane that any sane assessment said was lost. He told me there were ground guys all over that theater who were alive because of her and who would never meet her and would never know. He said she did not talk about any of it. He said she just kept flying and kept coming when she was called and kept her face down in the work, and let the men who needed an opinion of her have whatever opinion they wanted, because she had figured out a long time ago that the work was the only answer that mattered, and the work was always the same answer. I never told her to her face what I had tried to do at Verrill, find a different airplane. I have thought 100 times about telling her, about confessing it the way I am confessing it now, and 100 times I have decided I did not have the right, that an apology would only make it about me, when she had never once made it about herself. So I did the only thing I knew how to do instead. I went and found her before she rotated out, and I did not say much because she was not a woman you said much to. I just told her my men were alive, all of them. I told her Ortega was going to make it. And I told her that if she ever in the rest of her life anywhere in the world called for a man to stand with her, I would come and I would not ask why and I would not be late. She looked at me for a second with those steady eyes, the same look she'd given Prout at the brief. Then she put out her hand and I took it and she said, "Just remember it next time, the new pilot." And that was all. She got it. She had heard the chow tent. She had heard Hale. She had heard somehow all the way down at the back of that briefing room the man at the front trying to get a different airplane. She had heard all of it and she had flown into the guns for us anyway 11 times, and her only word about it to me was that I should remember it next time. Not for her sake, for mine. So that the next time a small quiet person walked across the line that I'd already decided about, I might keep my mouth shut and my eyes open long enough to be wrong. I have kept that. It is the only thing I am sure I have done right in a long career of being tired and certain. I kept it. There has not been a next time that I did not see her face, did not hear that flat level voice telling Prout to keep talking to her. Did not remember a woman climbing down steady off a ladder next to an airplane that should not have flown. People ask me when I tell it what made her like that. What it was, I used to try to answer. I don't anymore because there is no answer that is not smaller than the thing itself. All I can tell you is what I saw, which is that the bravest pilot in that valley was the one the whole flight line had decided to laugh at. And the difference between her and the rest of us was not in the airplane and was not in the hours and was not in anything you could put in a file. It was that when the weather came down and the floor of the world gave way and there was exactly one way to help and it ran straight through everything that could kill her, she did not weigh it. She just turned the nose down into the dark and came. She came, that is the whole story. They said she'd run the first time it got hot, and instead she stayed past the last bullet, and the men who laughed stood up straight in the dust and could not hold their salute steady, and I have never since heard one of them say a word about who flies the slow jets. There is nothing left to say. She answered it once in a single gray morning over Coram in a language that does not have any words in it at all, and after that there was only the standing and the silence and the long quiet afterward of men who had been wrong and knew it, and would carry it like a coin in the pocket for the rest of their lives, the way I carry mine.